Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy my new stories every day. I had always trusted Sarah. In the 10 years we'd been married, I considered us a team, each other's confidants, partners, and best friends. We had built a life I thought was solid, with steady careers, a modest home, and mutual dreams for the future. But in the weeks leading up to that fateful weekend, everything started to change. Sarah became distant, almost as if she drifted into a world where I didn't exist. The little things tipped me off at first, the constant messaging on her phone, the nervous way she'd keep it face down, even around me. And then, it was her sudden fixation on her appearance. Sarah had always been naturally beautiful to me, the kind of person who didn't need makeup or flashy clothes to shine. But lately, she was wearing new outfits, applying makeup before she even went to work, and ordering high-end perfume that she used sparingly yet noticeably. New perfume? I asked one morning as she brushed past me on her way out the door. She barely made eye contact. Yeah, a gift from a friend, she replied, her voice clipped. I wanted to believe her. Maybe she just wanted to spice things up, perhaps impress someone at work for a promotion. I shrugged it off, reminding myself that people could be complicated, even if they didn't always let you in on their reasons. But it wasn't just her appearance. Her schedule seemed scattered, filled with work dinners and late nights at the office. I didn't want to be that guy, the husband who questioned every move his wife made. But my gut wouldn't settle. It was an unfamiliar feeling, this tension in my chest, a prickling unease I couldn't shake. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if my insecurities were just paranoia. But then came the work trip. We were sitting at the breakfast table, both scrolling through our phones. It was a Friday, a day we usually looked forward to. But as I scrolled, sipping my coffee, she looked up at me, her expression calm, detached. I've got a work trip this weekend, she said, not even glancing up. Last-minute thing. Sorry, I know we had plans. A hollow pit opened in my stomach. Oh. Where are you going? I kept my tone light, casual. Some conference in the city, she replied, waving it off. Just an overnight thing, nothing exciting. She went back to her phone, almost as if she was hoping I wouldn't pry any further. All right, I replied, trying to sound neutral. I forced a smile and nodded. Maybe we can have a quiet night in when you get back. Yeah, sure, she mumbled, her fingers still dancing over her screen, her eyes never meeting mine. I wanted to believe her. But the feeling was back, stronger than before, gnawing at me. A little voice in my head whispered that something was wrong, and this time, I couldn't ignore it. As she left the room, I followed her with my eyes, watching her toss a new weekend bag into the back seat of her car. She'd never packed for a trip so quickly, so efficiently. She even smiled to herself as she got in, a rare, relaxed smile, as if she were genuinely excited about her conference. It was then that I knew. I didn't want to know, but I knew. And with that, I became a man I didn't recognize, driven by suspicion, compelled to dig into her private world, looking for evidence to confirm what my heart was already telling me. When she left that afternoon, I waited, letting her put some distance between us before I pulled out my phone. I hadn't dared to do this before. I thought if I didn't look too closely, maybe my suspicions would turn out to be unfounded, that I could pretend our marriage was as strong as I wanted it to be. But not anymore. I opened the location-sharing app we'd set up years ago, meant for emergencies, and there it was, her current location, clear as day. I watched her little blue dot on the map, following her trail as she drove, heart pounding, my hands trembling slightly. I had half expected her to head toward her office or some conference center in the city, but she didn't. Instead, she was headed out of town, the dot moving steadily away, further and further, until it finally stopped by the coast, 2 hours away from where she claimed to be. She was staying at a hotel. The same hotel where we'd spent an anniversary once, a romantic getaway overlooking the beach. She was there with someone else, reliving our memories with a stranger. The weight of the betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat there, trying to make sense of it, hoping for some innocent explanation, even though I knew there wasn't one. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not this time. The minutes ticked by, and I could feel the rage simmering, transforming my grief into something sharper. I wanted to confront her, to burst into that hotel room and watch her face crumble as I exposed her betrayal. But there was another part of me, the calculating part, that held me back. I wanted her to feel the full weight of what she'd done, to let the truth break her the way she'd broken me. So I planned, deliberately and meticulously. I spent the entire night consumed by the realization that Sarah had been living a double life. My heart swung wildly between raw pain and steely resolve. Each memory of us together now felt like a betrayal, each laugh, each kiss, all tainted by the deceit that lay just beneath the surface. But instead of falling apart, I found myself growing colder, my emotions hardening into a quiet determination. If Sarah had made this choice, I would make one of my own. I wasn't about to simply confront her and let her walk away from this with nothing but a bruised ego. No, I would make her understand what betrayal felt like, what it truly meant to break someone who had given everything for the relationship. I would make her feel it all. The weekend was long, and I went through it in a haze, occasionally checking her location on the app just to confirm what I already knew. She stayed in that same place all weekend, no deviation, not even for a late-night drive back home. That hotel by the beach, our beach, was now tainted in my mind, a silent witness to a betrayal that could never be forgiven. When she finally came home Sunday night, it was almost as if she wore an air of victory. She walked into the house as though nothing had happened, greeted me with a casual kiss on the cheek, and set her bag down by the door. I could barely hold back the disgust rising within me as I watched her, calm and collected, acting like the loving wife she had so clearly chosen not to be. "How was your weekend?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Oh, long and boring. Conferences aren't what they used to be," she said with a forced laugh, tossing her coat onto the rack. "You wouldn't believe how dull some of those sessions can get." I forced myself to smile, nodding in mock sympathy. "Sounds rough. You should get some rest." "Definitely," she replied, already heading upstairs without a backward glance. As she disappeared into our bedroom, I clenched my fists, feeling the fury rise within me. But I let it simmer, knowing that confronting her now would be letting her off easy. I would bide my time. The next day, while she was at work, I set my plan in motion. I gathered the evidence I would need, copies of our bank statements, phone bills, anything that could support the narrative I was piecing together. I even made a call to a private investigator. I needed more than just suspicions to back me up when the time came. I wanted proof beyond a shadow of a doubt that she'd broken her vows. Within a week, I had it. I knew the name of her lover, where he worked, and even when they met. They'd been seeing each other for months, meeting up whenever they could steal a weekend away, claiming work obligations on her end and business trips on his. It was clear she hadn't stumbled into an affair. This was calculated, planned, a recurring betrayal. Each new piece of information stung, yet strengthened my resolve. I decided the confrontation would happen at her birthday party. She was turning 35, and I had spent weeks preparing the perfect event, inviting friends and family, setting up decorations, and even renting a venue in the neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on me, how she probably thought I was oblivious, bending over backward to make her special day unforgettable, while all the while she'd been betraying me. But I knew that night would be unforgettable, just not in the way she'd imagined. On the night of the party, everything was perfect. The guests arrived early, bringing gifts and gathering around, complimenting the decorations. Sarah beamed as she greeted everyone, her smile wide, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I watched her from across the room, noting how she moved between guests, laughing, taking pictures, playing the role of the doting wife and friend as though nothing was amiss. Once everyone had settled in, I moved to the front of the room, where a projector was set up, ready for the slideshow I'd prepared. I clinked my glass, calling everyone's attention, and announced that we had something special prepared for Sarah, a little trip down memory lane, a slideshow of our years together. Sarah looked at me, her eyes warm with gratitude, and I almost faltered. Almost. But then I remembered the nights she'd spent away, the lies, the betrayal that had shattered my trust. And so, with a steady hand, I began the presentation. The first few slides were innocuous, pictures from our wedding, vacations we'd taken, memories shared over the years. Everyone watched, laughing and smiling as the memories flashed by. Sarah looked delighted, glowing as she saw moments from our past on display. But then, the slides changed. Photos from her work trips appeared, zoomed-in images of her and a man I'd come to recognize as her lover. The mood in the room shifted, laughter fading into stunned silence as people realized what they were seeing. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror. She glanced around the room, eyes wide, searching for an escape that wasn't there. And then, she looked at me, her face pale, pleading silently for me to stop. But I continued. The next slide showed a photo taken by the private investigator, a grainy shot of her and her lover embracing at the hotel. I could hear gasps around the room, murmurs of disbelief, and a few people exchanging horrified glances. Sarah's closest friends stared at her, mouths open, unable to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the person on the screen. By the time the slideshow ended, Sarah was trembling, her hands clutching her arms as though trying to hold herself together. I let the silence linger for a moment, letting the weight of what she'd done sink in. I wanted her to feel every ounce of shame, every drop of regret. She had made her choices, and now, surrounded by the people she'd deceived, she would finally understand the consequences. As the lights came back on, I turned to her, my face calm, my voice steady. "Happy birthday, Sarah. I hope you enjoyed the memories." She tried to speak, but no words came. The room was filled with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Some of our friends looked at the floor, some at me, but most stared at her, waiting for an explanation that would never come. It was over. In a matter of minutes, I had stripped away the facade she'd carefully built and left her standing there, exposed, with nothing to shield her from the truth. Finally, she found her voice, barely a whisper. Why would you do this?" I held her gaze, unflinching. "Why did you?" With that, I walked out, leaving her to face the wreckage of our life, the life she'd chosen to shatter. Leaving Sarah in that room filled with silent, stunned faces, I felt a rush of vindication. For months, I'd carried the weight of suspicion, then the devastating truth, alone. Now, finally, the burden was no longer mine. Everyone knew, and the facade was gone. The life we'd built together, one I once thought unbreakable, was irrevocably shattered. But even in my quiet satisfaction, there was a hollow feeling settling in, an emptiness that revenge hadn't quite filled. I drove home alone, the silence of the car oppressive, every tick of the turn signal reminding me of the moments ahead, the divorce, the division of property, and the life that would soon become my past. But at that moment, I didn't want to think about what came next. I just wanted to leave it all behind, if only for a night. When I arrived home, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, letting its warmth dull the edges of the night's events. Sitting there, staring out into the darkness, I replayed everything that had happened in those few intense moments, trying to make sense of my feelings. I had wanted her to feel the pain she'd caused me, to watch her crumble under the weight of her own choices. And she had. Yet it didn't bring the satisfaction I'd expected. I thought back to the slideshow, to the horrified looks on the faces of our friends and family. For years, they'd believed in us as the perfect couple. The betrayal wasn't just mine to bear, it had spilled over, touching everyone who had been part of our lives. The knowledge stung. But I had done what I came to do, and the truth was out. That would have to be enough. The next day, the fallout began. Sarah showed up at the house, her face red, her eyes swollen from crying, pleading for a chance to talk. I watched her from the other side of the room, feeling the weight of her betrayal still simmering inside me, cooling now into something more distant, almost detached. "Please, let me explain," she said, her voice cracking. I know what I did was horrible. I messed up. But I still love you. Do you?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "Because love doesn't look like what you've done." She flinched, her shoulders slumping as if the reality of her choices had finally settled on her. I was confused, and he made me feel alive. "But that doesn't mean I wanted to lose you. You have to believe me." I let out a bitter laugh. "Sarah, if you wanted to be with me, you could have been. But you didn't. You chose him, over and over again. You lied, you betrayed me, and not just once. This wasn't a mistake, it was a decision you made, time after time." She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands, her voice muffled by her fingers. "I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, congratulations, Sarah." "Because you did," I replied, unable to mask the anger that had been building inside me for so long. "You hurt me, and you hurt yourself. But now you want to act like none of it mattered. That it was all just some stupid mistake." I shook my head. "I'm not buying it. Not anymore." She lifted her head, her eyes shining with tears. "I know I can't change what I did. But maybe we could, start over." I stared at her, struggling to comprehend how she could think there was any way back from this. The life we'd built was gone, replaced by lies and deceit, by a version of her I barely recognized. The woman sitting before me wasn't the one I'd promised to love and protect. This was someone else, someone who had betrayed me at every turn. "You want to start over?" I asked, incredulous. "Sarah, there is no starting over from this. You burned that bridge the first time you lied to me, and every time after that." Her face crumpled, and she began to sob, her body shaking with the weight of her regret. But I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy, not anymore. I had loved her once, had shared every part of myself with her, but that was over. She had destroyed whatever love I had for her, leaving only the hollow shell of a marriage. Eventually, she stood, wiping her eyes. "I understand," she whispered, barely audible. "I'll go." She turned to leave, hesitating at the doorway. "If there's ever a chance," she began, but I cut her off. "There won't be," I said firmly. And with that, she walked out, the door closing softly behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, staring at the closed door, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The chapter was closing, and there was no going back. I had thought that ending things would feel like liberation, that I would feel lighter, free. But instead, I felt like I had lost something irreplaceable, even though it had been broken beyond repair. Over the next few days, I began to make arrangements for the divorce. The process was brutal, each decision cutting deeper, turning our shared life into a ledger of assets to be split, memories reduced to numbers and logistics. I could feel her desperation with each meeting, her attempts to negotiate, to find some way to salvage what we had lost. But I remained resolute, unwilling to compromise on the one thing that could never be salvaged, my trust. Friends reached out, offering sympathy, even support, but I kept them at a distance. I couldn't bear to rehash the details of the betrayal, to see the pity in their eyes. I had already exposed Sarah's secret to them, shown them the cracks in the life we'd built. I didn't need to keep reliving it. One evening, as I sifted through the remnants of our marriage, the photos, the shared possessions, the memories, I found myself lingering over a picture from our early years together. It was from our honeymoon, taken on a sunny beach, both of us laughing, oblivious to the future that lay ahead. I couldn't help but wonder if there had been signs even then, subtle indicators that I'd missed or chosen to ignore. I stared at the photo until the image blurred, my mind drifting into memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. But those memories weren't mine anymore, not in the way they once were. The past we'd shared had become a fiction, something that had never truly existed, not in the way I'd believed. And as I held the picture in my hand, I knew it was time to let it go, to leave the past where it belonged. I packed up the photos, the mementos, and everything that reminded me of the life I'd once thought was real. It was painful, a process of unmaking, of dismantling a part of myself that I had invested so much in. But as I placed the last box in the closet, a strange calm settled over me. The storm had passed, leaving a quiet in its wake, a blank slate that I could now rebuild on my own terms. The night before the divorce was finalized, I sat on the porch, a glass of whiskey in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The emptiness I had felt began to fade, replaced by a tentative sense of peace. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, it felt like mine again. And as the darkness settled around me, I let go of the last fragments of anger, of betrayal, of the life that could never be. I knew I would heal, and that someday, I would look back on this moment as the start of something new, a life untouched by deceit, a life finally free. The months after the divorce felt like coming up for air after being submerged for too long. I took small steps toward rebuilding my life, rediscovering old hobbies, spending more time with friends, and slowly reclaiming my sense of self. Sarah had been my world for so long that I had forgotten what it was like to make decisions solely for myself. And as I settled into this new phase, I found a quiet, steady peace that I hadn't known I needed. But the relief didn't last long. One morning, as I sifted through the usual stack of mail, I noticed a crisp white envelope, the kind used for formal correspondence. No return address. I opened it slowly, curiosity pricking at the edges of my calm. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with words printed neatly in the center. You don't know the whole story. My pulse quickened. My first thought was that it had to be from Sarah. Maybe she wanted to explain herself, or maybe it was one last attempt to pull me back into her life. But the lack of a return address felt off, unsettling. It didn't seem like her style. I threw the note away, chalking it up to a random, tasteless joke. I'd come too far to let a single letter drag me back into a chapter one had closed. A few weeks later, I was back at my usual cafe, the one I'd started frequenting in my newfound solitude. It was a peaceful place, my little escape, where I could read or work on my laptop, immersing myself in anything but my past. But as I was paying for my coffee, the barista handed me another note, this time folded and slipped under my cup. I looked around, confused, but the cafe was empty except for a couple at a far table. My heart thudded as I unfolded the note. There are things you need to know about Sarah. A chill ran down my spine. This couldn't be a coincidence. Whoever was leaving these notes was close, paying attention. They knew my routines. But why? Why now? Despite myself, curiosity got the better of me. That night, I pulled out my phone, hesitating before finally dialing Sarah's number for the first time since the divorce was finalized. She picked up on the third ring, her voice uncertain. Hello. Sarah, it's me, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Did you send me something? A note? No, she replied, her voice sharper than I expected. Why would I do that? We're done, remember? The line went silent as I tried to read her, to pick up any hint of dishonesty, but there was nothing. She sounded genuinely baffled. All right, I said, barely concealing my frustration. Forget it. After we hung up, the questions gnawed at me. If it wasn't Sarah, then who was it? And what were they trying to tell me? The following morning, I received a call from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but my curiosity got the better of me. Hello. Meet me at the Davenport Cafe. Noon tomorrow. You deserve to know the truth. The line went dead. The Davenport Cafe was a small spot across town, a place I hadn't been to in years. My hands trembled slightly as I hung up. This had gone from unsettling to downright eerie. But my gut told me I needed to see this through. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a seat by the window where I could see everyone who came in. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more far-fetched than the last. But just as I was beginning to lose hope, a woman approached my table. She was tall, slender, with dark hair and an aura of confidence. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place her. "Are you the one who called me?" I asked, trying to mask the unease in my voice. She nodded, sitting down across from me. "My name is Jessica. I work with Sarah, or rather, I used to." The mention of Sarah's name put me on edge. "What do you want from me?" I asked, struggling to keep my patience. "I'm here to tell you what Sarah didn't," Jessica replied, her tone calm, almost clinical. "I tried to convince her to tell you, but she wouldn't listen. She was too afraid." "Afraid of what?" I demanded, my frustration spilling over. What could she possibly have kept from me after everything she did? Jessica leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Afraid you'd find out that her affair was a cover. That she was doing it, to protect you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, struggling to make sense of what she was saying. To protect me? From what? Jessica took a deep breath. The man she was seeing wasn't just her lover. He was someone powerful, someone who had influence over her job and over your life. He knew things about you, things that could ruin you. Sarah went along with the relationship to keep him away from you, to keep him from targeting you and your family. The room spun as her words sank in. It was too much to process, too twisted to be true. "Why should I believe you?" I asked, barely keeping my voice steady. "This sounds like something out of a bad thriller." Jessica reached into her bag and handed me a stack of papers, thick and bound together. "This is a file on him, on everything he's done to keep Sarah in line. Bank records, emails, threats." She gathered them as evidence, hoping that one day she could walk away from him for good. She just didn't expect it to blow up the way it did. I flipped through the pages, my heart racing as I read the details. There were emails, surveillance photos, even payment receipts that traced back to the man she'd been seeing. It was all there, laid out before me, a puzzle whose pieces clicked together in a sickening realization. Jessica continued, her voice softening. "Sarah never told you because she thought she could handle it on her own. But as things spiraled out of control, she realized that she'd made a terrible mistake. She wanted to keep you safe, but instead, she lost you." I couldn't breathe, the weight of what I was reading pressing down on me like a tidal wave. The months of anger, of betrayal, suddenly felt hollow, built on a lie I had never understood. And Sarah. I had hated her, despised her for what she'd done, without ever knowing why. Jessica watched me, her expression unreadable. "She didn't think you'd ever forgive her, even if you knew the truth. But she wanted you to know it wasn't as simple as you thought." For a long moment, I sat there in silence, trying to process everything. The woman I had once loved, the woman I thought had destroyed me, had sacrificed herself to protect me in ways I hadn't known. I didn't know whether to feel relief, sorrow, or something in between. Finally, I looked up at Jessica. "Where is she now?" She left town after the divorce, trying to put as much distance between her and him as possible. She knew she couldn't keep the charade up anymore, not after everything fell apart. As I left the cafe, the world outside felt different, unsteady beneath my feet. The life I thought I'd understood had been a shadow, cast by truths that I hadn't been ready to face. I didn't know what would come next, or if I'd ever see Sarah again. But one thing was clear, the story of our marriage was not what I'd thought. And somewhere, deep down, a part of me wondered if it was possible to start again, this time, with all the cards on the table.